I'm ready.
So my guest today on One for the Road is Lauren White. She is a transformation mentor specialising in trauma, addiction, mental health and well-being. She's also an addictions counsellor and a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. Wow. And all that at just 11 years old.
11 years old?
You're so young you are, honestly. Seeing you
Huh?
on my screen, you've done such a lot in your life already. And this is why I wanted to get you on to finish my season of One for the Road off, because I've met you before. You are such an inspiration to so many. So I'm really grateful
Oh,
that you've joined me today.
thank you so much. I'm blushing. You know what?
I
Like,
don't
yeah,
think it's recording. Oh, it is recording.
it
Ah,
is recording.
fuck. Okay,
You can cut,
we'll cut this out.
you can cut this out. And oh, thank you so much. Honestly, I'm quite blushing to be honest. I've just come off a plane from Bali where I live, and to be able to share my story, my hope, my courage to you and to your listeners is an honor to me, honestly, because for me, it's generally about touching people's hearts and trying to inspire people for change. And that's something that you're doing. So it's a testament to you as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Lauren. And I always like to wind it all the way back. And I've heard your story before, but there'll be a few on here that haven't. So do you want to start with when you was a kiddie growing up and what that was like, where you grew up and how things
Yeah,
changed?
of course. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting when I talk about the word addiction and alcoholism and self-sabotage. I think people have this expectation that there's something that must have gone deeply wrong within you when you were younger. And the funny thing is that my childhood was in many ways a good childhood. I came from a nice family in Hertfordshire, two brothers and a sister. I'm Jewish, so we were really tight knit in our community. Um, and I had everything I wanted on the outside. Like my dad put me into really good private schools. I had a very good education. I would always go on nice holidays. So, materialistically, my life was great. So I had, a very good upbringing in that sense. Um, but there was a lot of underlying trauma there. From a very young age. I can identify that from being literally 11 years old. And unfortunately, I did have family members that had struggled with addiction. Addiction runs in my family. So my second cousin is actually 20 years sober from heroin. Um, and my mum and my brother both had issues with alcohol. So growing up, obviously, alcohol was very prevalent in my life. Whether or not I knew it was an issue growing up when I was in my younger years, obviously later in life I knew it was an issue. But you know how I saw learned behavior growing up was it's easier to have a drink to take away all the fear and all the anxieties. Um, but my trauma was little things like, um, my mum had breast cancer when I was 12 years old. And I found that one very difficult to deal with and to manage. I had a very complicated relationship with my mum, which I talk about a lot. Um, she and I, growing up, we weren't that close. But then years went on, we became closer. But obviously, I watched her drinking growing up, which obviously affected me. And then when she had breast cancer, I was confused because there was this mum that I had this really complicated relationship with, and then I had this mum who was sick. And you know, ultimately, when you're that age, you don't really know how to deal with feelings and emotions. You just want to run away from it. And I just remember just wanting to drink on it. And for me, drinking started when I was 11. But yeah, there was a few things in my life that obviously made me want to turn to things to change the way I feel. Another one being the fact that, I was dyslexic and just diagnosed ADHD when I was 12. And I'm talking about this much more within my recovery and in my life around being diagnosed with ADHD and always feeling different and not being able to socialize and not being able to feel like you are normal. Um, and being diagnosed with ADHD and putting on medication from a young age, like Ritalin and Concerta, obviously affected my mindset and how I looked at the world and life. So
Well, so
my
sorry, Lauren, but 12 years old is a really prevalent part of your life, isn't it? You had such a lot
yeah,
going on, being
yeah,
diagnosed with ADHD. Your mum's got diagnosed with breast cancer and you started drinking as well. Was your
yeah.
drinking from learned behavior of seeing your role models around you drinking because they were stressed or anxious? You know,
Mhm.
often we're shown the signs, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah.
When you say I started drinking at that age, is what was in your mind at that particular time? Because it's quite young, isn't it?
It
What?
was very young, and my drinking started when I was at like bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs and weddings and house parties, and it was easily accessible back then. And when I started drinking, I knew that it would take away all those anxieties and all those fears. But do you know what? Like, I hate to say it, but I loved it.
Mm,
Like, I love the drink, and you know, I love the feeling of feeling out of control.
mm,
Um, and obviously, yeah, it was learned behavior in the sense of like it was accessible. My family were like, I used to have house parties, I used to have friends over. Like, me and my brother would go wild, we'd go to all these places and have loads of friends and do what we need to do very young, obviously. But like, I just knew that the taste of alcohol, what alcohol made me feel, was ultimately the reason why I carried it on. Obviously peer pressure was a huge part of it. Um, but I was always the one that insinuated alcohol. I was always the one that wanted more alcohol. So
mm,
I always knew I had a problem because I would always be the one that was like, let's get drink, let's get paralytic. But I was always the one that got so drunk that actually ended up not even turning up to the party because I was so paralytically drunk. Um, but obviously, how I describe it was progressive because it started off with alcohol, then it was marijuana and cigarettes, then it was MDMA and cocaine, then it was ketamine and ecstasy. And then obviously by I was 18, I was doing everything that I'd
God.
said I'd never do. And it was almost like once I had drank
Mm,
and I got to the limit of drinking, I wanted something that made me feel even more high.
mm,
And MDMA and ecstasy was like my dream because I found it really hard to socialize and intimacy was very difficult for me. I struggled a lot with intimacy, especially
mm.
intimacy of men, which is something I talk about a lot because I think a lot of people don't talk about. And MDMA would make me feel loved, like I just love everyone.
Does that come down to your relationship with your mum? Because in the beginning you said it was complicated. Do you want to go into that a bit more?
It's you're very right here, and actually it's really funny you say this, Dave, because I don't really talk about it much, but I have evidently, since moving to Bali, worked a lot on my masculine and feminine energy. And I have a very masculine energy. And I know the reason why I've got very masculine energy is because I never felt like I had a mother growing up, a maternal instinct. And I think when you don't have your present mother, you lose part of yourself.
Mm,
And you also lose part of your intimacy, like I said, and you also lose this sense of safety,
mm.
um, your mother wound, right? So yeah, that was a lot of the reasons why I feel like I had a lot of issues.
And was she not there for you emotionally through drinking?
It's a very complicated situation with this because it wasn't that she wasn't there for me, but because there were so many family members that were sick within my family, like my younger brother, when I was 18 years old, had cancer. Um, my brother went into rehab at 15. Um, my, there was a lot of other issues going on.
Mm,
My problems weren't the most important, but that's okay.
mm.
Um, but it wasn't that she didn't care about me. It was just she had a different way of loving me.
Yeah, I really identify to that because I quite
Yeah.
often talk about my mum and dad, and they
Mm.
were there for me practically on every single level. You know, good dinners, always made sure, even though it's secondhand clothes, they look nice. Um, But when it come to showing sort of love and telling me they love me and were proud of me, that wasn't ever there. But I put that down to an era, maybe, I don't know. But it affected me throughout my life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
well into my addiction, because I didn't understand it. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's trauma, I believe, isn't just big T's, little T's. It depends on who you are, how it affects you, you
Yeah.
know.
Great.
And your upbringing sounds idyllic in the beginning, but very, very complicated pretty quickly at an early age. And
Yeah. Yeah. No, but it was complicated because, like I said, I had everything on the outside,
yeah,
but on the inside, it wasn't. How I describe it is like, I know my parents love me. I've got a very good relationship with them now. I've learned to understand them. I've done a lot of work on myself now to get to that place of understanding the way that they are. And it all comes from their traumas and their family. And it's, do you know what I mean? But for me, and I talked to my dad about it. I spoke to about it today. For me, it was about my perspective and the way that I saw it. And
mm,
for me, it was like, I needed a mother. I didn't need a child. And that's what I got,
mm,
because I got almost a child. So a lot growing up for me was role reverse. I had to look after my mum
mm,
because she was a child, and that came from her mum being abandoned and all of that stuff. And you know, and that really affects you as a person because you don't feel security, you don't feel safe.
mm,
So when you pick up alcohol, and obviously my story is not just alcohol, it's drugs, but it's also bulimia and eating disorders.
mm,
When you pick up things like that, it almost becomes your safety net. It becomes your family. It becomes the thing that you love, that you go as a crutch because you don't feel nurtured. And I don't know if you've seen the documentary about the three perfect strangers,
the triplets.
the triplets. And
Yeah,
it talks about nature versus nurture. And then one of the
yeah,
guys kills himself because he was in a family that don't nurture him. And it
mm,
is all about nurture.
mm,
If you aren't held in those priming years
exactly.
as a child, in nurtured and made feel like you are safe, you are going to subconsciously self-sabotage one way or another.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've learned all about that. I've recently qualified to be a trauma-informed coach, and it was all about that. Yeah. And,
Amazing.
the Body Keeps a Score talks about it, and the Romanian babies where they were just left in the room to cry. But one nurse crept in and cuddled two babies, right, secretly every night. And then they went
Wow.
back, what is it, 20, 30 years later to see what they had done in their lives. And a lot of them went on to do crime, serious crime. The two babies that were held were successful. They had amazing
That's what I
marriages
mean.
and families. Do you know what I mean? It's that
Yeah.
the beginning, the nestling is so important.
So important.
So, so, so with all these addictions going on, was the bulimia part of that
The
all
bulimia was,
together?
yeah. Well, for me with the eating disorder, which is something that I obviously talk about, like, it was so easy to say I had an alcohol problem, right? Like when I was 18, it was obviously very different back then because it wasn't normal for someone that in those days to get sober. Now it's quite common to get sober. But like, to say I was an alcoholic was like not glamorized, but it was easier to say that than saying, yeah, I'm a bulimic. Because like
Mm,
the thought of throwing up and, the act of being bulimic is just disgusting. So it took me many years to admit I was bulimic, but to come out and say that I was a bulimic was probably the most freeing thing I'd ever done.
mm,
But my eating disorder has always been something that has been there. And yet again, it stemmed from my childhood. It stemmed from um, being around people that looked amazing, coming from a family that were very good looking family, having this expectation that I had to be a size zero, getting offered a modeling contract when I was 14 years old, working for Abercrombie and Hollister, them telling me that I need to wear a size zero jean. So I actually starved myself to fit into this size zero jean. Um, and then obviously over exercising and not keeping up with the expectation, because obviously weighing yourself is not healthy. And then going from the cycle of binging, purging, eating, not eating, drinking within that. and then multiple years of abusing my body and losing my periods. And it's really sad what I did when I look back at it. But it's just another, yet again, form of self-sabotage. But how I describe it is, yet again, within my trauma with my family, I used to have Friday night dinner every Friday with my family. And that Friday night dinner was very overwhelming for me. And it was like too many people and always like fighting and da da da. And how I dealt with that was by eating.
Mm.
And I don't know if you relate to that. I don't know if anyone else relates to that listening. I'm pretty sure that people do
Lauren,
relate.
let me just tell you, right, that with all the female clients mainly that I work with, bulimia comes up quite often.
Yeah,
All people I talk to, and there seems to be so much more shame as well around that subject. Like
so
it's a
much shame.
real elephant in the room with a lot of addictions, because
Yeah.
especially as well when we start digging a little bit deeper and that comes out, and it could be from early childhood memories of different things, like I don't want to go into it and confidentiality and stuff like that, but it is such an elephant in the room.
It is. It is.
And when people get sober as well,
Yep.
it comes out,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it's what. So when you was 18, you checked into rehab, right? What can you tell me how you was feeling that day you checked in? Like your life was a catalogue of mind-altering drugs for years and years and years, and you've named it all now with the blame. What kind of mental state was you in when you checked in that day?
Um, okay, this is where I just kind of want to just talk about like the different journey that I was on. When you go into recovery and you surround yourself around people that like from all walks of life, right? Like I came into rehab basically trying to look the most perfect that I could look. Like I was a size 8. I thought I was the biggest, like most egotistic person ever. I thought no one could touch me. I probably was wearing makeup trying to be someone that I wasn't. Like, yeah, I broke down to my parents, basically what happened was, and I said to my parents, I need to go into rehab. They knew that I was struggling. My mum was sober at the time and she had family in recovery. Sorry, she had friends in recovery. I remember being in my kitchen and my mum's hairdresser, who's in recovery, was like, are you all right? And I went to the back of my garden and I was like training for 2 hours. And literally the night before had a massive binge and purge and I was drinking. And I was just training on the gym in exercise, so unmanageable. Talk about unmanageable. I was like on the gym, on the elliptical, trying to burn off the million calories that I had, whatever. Obviously, still drunk from the night before. And she turned around to me. She was like, "You're right." And I broke down. And I was like, I fucking hate myself. I cannot look at myself in the mirror. I am every day self-sabotaging. I cannot have a day without not basically binging and purging and drinking. And that was the day that I surrendered. And there was no rock bottom in the sense of like, no, I wasn't dying in hospital. But I had got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore.
Mm.
I just literally was like, I cannot do this anymore. And I had seen my brother get sober, I'd seen my mum get sober, and I'd see them change their lives around from the people they hated. And you say attraction rather than promotion, right? I saw them live this life of happiness and I fucking hated myself. Um, and then that following week, my parents put me into Charterhouse, which is a rehab for 4 months. And it was terrifying. Yeah, you're right. For me, it was when we talk about shame, for me, it was the shame. I was at university studying business. I had a boyfriend who was very toxic at the time. I was working in clubs. So I was living this like perfect life that everyone thought I was living, but hiding literally with this like secret I had. And I just checked into rehab to basically deal with all of this shit. And to admit that you had done it and failed, like, because at the time I thought it was a failure,
Mm.
I'd hit my bottom.
And
But
How was the
Like,
first few weeks of rehab? Because you've gone in there with a swagger.
yeah, well, I mean, they knocked me, Dave. They
Yeah.
knocked me back. Like, oh my God, there were times I've never shared this before, but there was one day I walked in with like a belly top, and they looked at me and they're like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Mm.
Like they knocked my ego. I was doing a beauty pageant. They turned around to me. They're like, "Why are you doing this?" Like, the problem was that I had so much ego and pride that I thought that I was like the most incredible person because
Externally.
obviously externally, yeah, because I tried to make everyone seem like I was
Yeah.
perfect. And then they sat me down and they literally took every single ego I had of myself and I broke down. I don't think I'd ever cried before.
Mm.
And I think the years and years and years of trauma that I'd been through with my mom and my brother and, all of that stuff and myself, like, obviously, I never felt my feelings. I never showed any element of sadness. All I learned for those years was to be strong, right?
Yeah.
Strong. And then when I went into rehab, I did a lot of psychotherapy in groups, and they literally psychoanalyzed me. Like, I would sit in a chair and they'd be like, they'd literally question everything I was doing at the time. And at the time I needed it. I needed someone to just basically take all of the shield that I had
Yeah.
and the pride that I had for me to start feeling my feelings. And deep down, I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was terrified.
I mean, from your work about internal family systems, we put all these manager roles up, don't we? And we protect ourselves. And from an early age, you had to grow up really quickly, right?
Exactly that. That was the exact thing. You know, I became the adult
Yeah.
and my family became the children, and I had to look after my other siblings. It wasn't normal. Like, I generally actually thought, Dave, that it was normal to go into a rehab. I thought it was normal at the age of 18 to go see your brother in a rehab.
Yeah.
Like, hospital visits were normal within my family, going to Watford General or police visits or whatever. Like, I generally thought that was normal. And then when I got sober, I realized that's not normal. None
Mm.
of it is normal. Um, but I got introduced to a lot of things very, very young,
Mm.
which made me grow up very, very young.
Yeah, of
But I
course.
also lost sense of childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that 4 months, they broke you. Like, you did a lot of work as well. I know that. It's not all down
I
to
was a
them to
meeting.
fix you,
Sorry, sorry.
right? Because
Yeah.
you had the great awareness to associate with your feelings again, right? Because for all those years you disassociated, right? And how were you when you came out? Like, it's a bit like you're too young, but there used to be a program called Stars in the Rise, right? And they used to
I
go in
know
normal,
stars
you
in your
do,
eyes.
and they would come out a completely different person, right? What was the Lauren White that came out of rehab?
Um,
Who was?
well, I'm completely different to who I was, Dave. Like, I think if me and you met before I went into rehab, you would hate me. Like, I was a princess. Like, I was just like wearing makeup, wearing heels, like very entitled, like had no, I don't know, I can't even honestly. I have friends that are literally I couldn't even imagine you being like that. And then whilst I was in rehab, obviously I got introduced to AA. I went through the steps and I went to meetings every single day. For anyone listening, like, AA saved my life. CA, I also was prevalent in CA and NA as well. ABA, OA, I'm in all the A's pretty much. Saved my life. But I was going through the steps and doing the work. And it was the steps that pretty much really changed me, if I'm honest. So when I was in there was a lot of changes I had to make within myself. The reason why I'm sharing this, because when I came out, I had to do a lot of changes within the real world. So I stopped modeling because I couldn't deal with the modeling industry because it was ruining my life with my eating disorder and the rejection. I stopped working in clubs for the time being and being around people that were drinking. I had to distance myself from particular friends. Um, a lot of my friends ended up being people in recovery, twice my age. And I guess I came out a bit more of a humble person. And I started to like really strip back what doesn't make me happy and ask myself what does make me happy. So actually, like I fell back in love with running. I started doing half marathons and triathlons. Um, I didn't really wear much makeup because I don't really care about that stuff. Like I'm truly a tomboy. So I found my authentic self. Obviously, I started working with the Amy Winehouse Foundation, which was amazing, and going into schools and doing talks. So I found my passion and my purpose, which was speaking. Um, and I guess I became much more of an authentic person. So the transformation for me was generally my personality went back to who I truly was.
Mm.
Um, looks wise, I looked the same. But I was much happier. Like I had such like much more happiness in my face rather than like being I was a moody bitch.
Mm.
Honestly, like I hated everyone in the world before I went into rehab. And then
Well,
I came,
yeah, and I'll tell you what, I think that comes down to hating ourselves.
oh, I hated myself
Yeah,
so much.
well, we reflect it out on the outer world, right? Because
Hmm.
I used to
Hmm.
be really judgmental, quite bitter and twisted in my own way. Do you know what I mean? Like moaning about everyone, and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and one of the biggest things that has changed in me since becoming sober is acceptance of others. You
Hmm.
know, and I have so much more time for so many people now.
Yeah,
And
love
that's
that.
one of the parts of my sobriety that I absolutely love. Not the weight loss or the, all the bits and pieces that are amazing, but that side of my personality that's brought out my authentic self.
Yeah,
But quite often, when people get sober, they have not got a clue who they are. And
yeah.
and I use the metaphor of being in prison for years and years and years,
Mm.
and you're institutionalized in there. So when you come out, so like my prison sentence was 40 years in with drinking, come out, and the first 3 months you're learning how to live on the outside, or 6 months, right? But then all of a sudden you get up one day and you go, who the fuck am I? Right.
Yeah,
And that can
exactly.
often lead you to rob the post office to go back in because you know how that runs inside.
Yeah, very
So
good energy.
yeah, and the emotional sobriety is such a big part of that
Yeah,
story in your life. But it
yeah,
seems to me like you did the work quite early on, maybe with the steps,
yeah.
and you found yourself pretty quickly, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very militant with the steps back in the day, like really random. And I do not recommend this to anyone, by the way. This is not normal. But my first ever sponsor was my mum's sponsor. Do not recommend it. But obviously she is very, you may know her actually. I don't, she's like very big in recovery. She's like the queen of recovery. So I'll tell her I'll tell you after the podcast what her name is. But she took me through the steps very quickly. She was very, very militant with me. She was the type of sponsor that would pull me up on my shit. And I needed that. I
Mm,
needed someone to just tell me how it was. And from a very, very, very early on part of my recovery, I was at meetings every single day. And I was listening and I was learning and I was engaging and I was, taking on other people's suggestions and doing what was needed to be done to change. And the one thing that I would highly recommend anyone to really, really understand is that there's always my part in it.
mm,
And I kind of realized that, but it took me a long time to realize there was a part in it for me because we talk about blaming everyone else
mm.
because that's what happened. I blamed everyone else. If my mum wasn't an addict, if my brother wasn't this, if my brother was, you know, all of these things that I had been through, I blamed my whole family to why I was doing half the things I was doing. And then I realized very quickly on that I've always got an option or a choice of how to deal with these things. And yeah, I just really, really put my heart and my soul in it. But slowly and slowly, I started to realize that it was less about the substance and it was more about me. And yeah, and I love what you spoke about there about identity, right? Because in all of my talks that I share within addiction, because I was in Ubud recently in Bali doing a talk around addiction, and I generally spoke about the fact that, you know, drinking and drugs and substances to change the way you feel, you not only have the physical part, but you also have the mental part where you actually get to a point where you actually lose your identity. You lose who you are as a person because you actually start to question who's actually making decisions.
Yeah.
Because half of the things in my drinking that I did wasn't me. And it's a warped perception of who I was as a person. And
Yeah.
then when I'm drinking, you're like, who the fuck am I?
Well,
So
you know, I looked at it like I was an actor for 40 years and I was a shapeshifter because I could go in any room, right, and adapt to any person, whether it's a builder, a lawyer, whoever it was, right, I would put on a different accent. A builder would be, hello, my son. A lawyer would be, hi, how are you today? Okay. You know, but also, Lauren, that was to be liked or loved, to be
yeah.
accepted by everyone else
Mm,
because I couldn't accept who I was because I didn't know who I was. Right. So, and then that becomes habit as well, where
yeah.
you're going through your life, you're not developing.
Yeah.
You're not developing from a young age with your emotional state, right? Because from 14 years old, I was changing, and I love that what you said there is changing, using a substance to change how I feel is
Mm-hmm.
exactly spot on, right? Because I wasn't feeling good about anything in my life. I felt rejected. I felt alone. I felt fat. I felt ugly. I felt all of these things. And I needed alcohol to change how I felt. So then I could act differently so people would accept that version of me. But when I stopped, I didn't know what version I was. So I almost had to not care in a way.
Yeah.
What people thought. And that was the hard bit, right, Lauren, because I cared for 54 years what people thought of me. And all of a sudden, because I know, like with AA, they say, you know, don't get involved in a relationship for a year in the first year of recovery and stuff like that. And for me, it was like I had to be careful who I mixed with in the first few months. So I had to stop mixing with my old mates who would be influential and stuff. And I almost
Yeah.
became a little bit solitary as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well. It's like once you lose those friends, for example, it's also like, who are you? Do you know what I mean? Like you are having a complete rewire
Yeah.
of
A
your life.
reset, a complete
And
hard reset.
yeah, so it's terrible. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know if you relate to this, but there has been some dark times in my recovery. You know,
Definitely.
I don't know if I don't know if you know this about me, but at 21, I went back into rehab. Um, I talk about this a lot, but I had a really bad burnout with work. So I talk a lot about work addiction, being another issue that I had. I put a lot of my dependency on work. That's where I got um my validation and my approval for myself. And I just nonstop worked. And when I spoke about ADHD, it came up with my ADHD as well, because obviously I was just nonstop all the time. And I eventually lost myself in work and I became a slave to the work. And actually, there was a period where I made myself physically ill that I actually ended up trying to kill myself. And checking back into rehab at 21 to deal with the shit again.
Mm.
And and then realizing that I hadn't dealt with a lot of the underlying trauma. And another thing which I talk about my story is that it's not just about AA for me. It's also about doing trauma work and doing deep work, understanding my rejection issues, my abandonment issues, my um, my acceptance of myself, like you said. And actually, like you said, you know, really trying to take yourself away from what you fucking what people think about you, what
Mm.
they think about you. And that's the problem. Like, as mammals and as humans, all we want in this world, because obviously that's what, mammals and humans do, they want community. They want to be accepted. They want to
Connection.
be liked. They
Yeah.
want connection. So who are you if you don't connect?
Yeah.
And when you're sober, something that we yearn for so much is to be connected, but we sometimes don't feel connected. So alcohol it would be a fake connection.
But don't forget, Lauren, when we have trauma that we have to address, we're not even connected to ourselves, right? Because you said in the beginning, you were emotionally dissociated from all of it, right? You didn't
All of it.
feel anything, right? I
No.
quite often talk to people. Recently Matt Willis was on my podcast. He said he doesn't remember anything before he was 10 years old.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
don't remember.
a typical example. Do you know what I mean? So it's about connecting with ourselves first. And when we haven't done that all our lives because we've numbed out, that's a really difficult thing to do. And that takes time as well. And this is why I say to people, concentrate on stopping the drinking first. And then there's all the time in the world to deal with that, but it
Yeah.
has to be dealt with, right?
Yeah.
Because if it isn't, we end up going back to the booze or
Exactly that.
something else. Right?
Exactly that. But that's what I said about what I say about my story being, yeah, I got sober at 18 and
Yeah.
I haven't touched a drink or a drug in 11 and a half years, but that doesn't mean that other things have popped up for me.
No. So 3 years
A lot.
after, your workaholism was another avoidance thing, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Another coping mechanism. And
Yeah.
it's something that I'm very lucky that I turn 31 tomorrow.
Oh,
And
happy birthday.
thank you very much. And I look back on my life and I'm like, wow, like you don't have any addictions, Lauren. Like you've got a very good work-life balance. I mean, it does help that I live in Bali and I have made this myself.
Yeah.
You, don't act out in your eating disorder like you used to do. I have the occasional binges, but they're not that bad. You don't drink or do drugs, but it doesn't mean that I don't go through these
Nice.
issues. It doesn't mean that I don't get upset about, you know, people or places or things, or my head, is screwed up. But I've just learned to be able to not turn to those things to change the way I
Yeah,
feel.
and to be able to manage life without turning to a substance. And this is it. I've been through a really, really difficult divorce since being sober. I've
Mm,
got amazing things in my life right now, but I've had some really tough times, but I've managed them
mm,
without turning to a drug. And for 40 years, I just turned to a drug. It was almost like that. It's like, oh, fuck it, I need a drink, or oh, I need to get pissed, right? And we have to grow up when we stop drinking, and we have
yeah,
to face life um, on its own terms at times. Do you know what I mean? And that is the key to it. So tell me then about from when you got sober, right? 3 years later, you went into rehab again. But
yeah,
the amazing work you're doing now. So when you say about the Amy Winehouse Foundation, so I've got original prints in my house of Amy, and it's almost like, yeah, honestly, I have such a connection with her. It's
oh,
such a spiritual connection. Um, and I look at it every morning with so much compassion. What got you involved in this? How did you land this gig talking in the Amy Winehouse Foundation?
it's really random. So like, I I kind of grew up associated to her family because I'm Jewish and she's Jewish, and her dad Mitch like knows my dad, and but also one of the like investors or founders, not founders but guys that had managed the foundation, is a guy that I knew. And he actually originally asked me to go into schools and do talks around facts around drugs for this company called LACA UK. And at the time I was like, fine, I'm going to do that and whatever. And then we were going through our like a course to do it. And then one of the Amy Winehouse Foundation coordinators was there doing the course with me. And she just asked me about my story. And she was like, your story's amazing. I mean, it wasn't common in that days to get sober at 18. It just wasn't. And that was when she was like, do you want to come in and do talks for schools? And I was like, yeah, of course. And that started my very good relationship with the foundation. And I would go to the galas every year. You know, I've done some talks all over the UK with them. I am one of their ambassadors. I'm not as so affiliated with them like I used to be, but I'm very, very close to Jane, Mitch's ex-wife, and Mitch, and I still keep in touch with them. And when I get an opportunity to come back and do a school talk, I do. But they have a very close place in my heart. You know, Jane actually came to visit me in the rehab when I was
Oh, did
21.
she? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're like family to me. But I don't think they're as active as they were. They do still do talks and stuff like that, but they're not as active. Before they were much more active.
Mm.
But I am very close to them.
And tell me what a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner is. I can't even
Practitioners,
say it.
NLP,
Oh, NLP, of course it is.
NLP. Yeah, so neuro-linguistic programming is basically the programming that we have within our brain of the way that we speak to
Yeah,
ourselves.
of course.
So it's about rewiring the way that we see the world, the way that we have our perspective. So you know how you spoke about habits and patterns,
Yeah,
self-limiting beliefs. It all comes from somewhere, right? Um, so I work with my clients mainly to understand the way that they speak to themselves, what they
yeah,
tell themselves on a daily basis, and looking at different perspectives and different ways of trying to change that.
yeah.
And looking at their self-limiting beliefs as well, and their values. So those things are honestly, I think it's a game changer.
Absolutely. I mean, one, I cannot believe I didn't correlate the two together because I talk about NLP all the time. That's just crazy,
Yeah,
right?
but you know what it is? It's a term that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's basically, yeah, what
No,
you
it's like I remember I was with my girlfriend a few months ago and she took a wrong turning or something. She went, I'm such an idiot. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, can we stop there?
Yeah,
And do you know what? We had a conversation about it, and she's never ever said it since.
that's
You know,
amazing.
it's so important, and especially in recovery, right? Because we often spend years and years and years criticizing
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, like beating ourselves up, saying I'm this, I'm that. If we have a slip up in recovery, we're like, oh, I'm useless, I can't do this and stuff. And it's so important how we speak to ourselves.
Yeah,
I can't speak highly about be loving, kind to yourself,
yeah.
gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
So you must be coming up, what, 12, 13 years sober then?
I am 11 and a half years
11 and
sober.
a half years
Yeah.
sober. So tell me what is different now, like all the amazing work you do,
Oh, it's mad.
because you're such a presence, right? And I know you're humble in that, but I met you at the Alcohol Change UK 10K thing with Ollie Ollett and that, and you did your talk, and like you have such a presence for such a young
Oh,
person.
thank you. I was actually really nervous. I don't know why, but
Uh, you didn't need to be.
no.
Mind you, I say that, but I was nervous as well. I didn't even plan it. I just get up and talk
Yeah, that's
about
what I
it.
mean. I literally just got up and spoke.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But what else do you do? So you moved to Bali, didn't you? How long
I
ago
live
was that?
I live in Bali.
I mean,
I
what a dream that is, right?
it's just my happy place. Like I was very burnt out last year. I was working as an events manager and brand partnerships manager, living the external life, right? And like this is another thing, like we can go into another podcast and talk about, but I've had my back and forth with like the materialistic world and my ego and my pride and my identity around that. And I've really had to take a step back. And my being in Bali has really helped me kind of just like I walk around in flip-flops. I drive a motorbike that everyone drives.
Mm,
I don't care about those things. Like, not that I'm a monk or anything, but like I feel less stressed having to try and be a certain way,
mm,
you know, and not always think about my status. And I was just burnt out. I was living like a work life last year. Obviously, I have battled my work addiction. It wasn't a work addiction, but it was like I was in a job that was working like 9 hours a day, like you do here. And I turned 30 and I was like, I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to get up every day and get a train to Old Street and get home at 5 p.m. and live for the weekend. And I literally quit my job and moved half around the world. But my whole passion was speaking. And what I've done since then is just like not being egotistic at all, but I'm really proud of myself.
Mm.
You know, I got one-to-one clients that I've been working with. I've been doing workshops online monthly. I've done really amazing talks. I did a talk recently for Millie, for the Sober Girls Society.
Yeah.
I'm doing a talk this weekend at Wellnergy. I'm doing a talk in Surrey for Wisdom Wellness. I did a talk in Ubud, in an incredible retreat in Bali, with around the Conscious Festival around addiction. I'm actually doing something with a Hollywood actress in the next couple of months, which will be amazing in Bali. I'm doing more retreats. There's just a lot of like incredible things that are happening for me that I'm just like, this is what you get back when you are sober.
Well, it sounds like to me you've really found like your inner passion of what you really want to do, you know. And when you say you walk around in flip-flops with no makeup on and whatever, that's the real you, right? Not the
That is my authentic
model
self.
who was caked in makeup and a size 0.
And
You know,
hating my life.
hating your life but
Yeah.
hating you. That's
Yeah.
the difference, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I find it hard now, Lauren, to say I love me. I like me. I like the version of me now. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to that. Do you know, I really love me. I don't know why I struggle with that, but I do. But, you
Takes
know,
time.
I'm a lot more content in the person I've become, how my nature is, how my nervous system is so regulated now, where before it was so dysregulated. Do you know what I mean? I was always in fight or flight, adrenaline, cortisol flying around my body, or again, you know, isolated, like fawning, like just completely isolating myself from the outside world by taking this terrible drug. Do you know what I mean? Lauren, this is my last podcast of the season, and I really wanted to get you on to finish it with, but there'll be a
I
lot
feel
of people.
honored.
Well, honestly, yeah, I have been waiting for this, but there are a lot of people all over the world be listening to this, and they'll be so impressed that you're 30 years old, 31 tomorrow, and you've done so much already, right? But what advice could you give to these people who are really struggling or that on the fence, or, you know, I never ever compare drinking as well. You don't have to be in inverted brackets the alcoholic on the bench or under a bridge. You can be drinking a couple of glasses of wine a night, or binge drinking at the weekends, or, you know, basically not a take or leave it drinker. What would you say to someone listening to this podcast and thinking, do you know what? I know I've got a problem with it, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, what I always say to people is like, okay, I got sober at 18, right? I justified myself for the first like 16 to 18. I knew I had a problem. I knew that I was an issue, right? But I justified it in so many ways. Like the justification that people have. The one thing I'd always say is always ask your gut, not your head. Our thinking is fucked up. My thinking would tell me I'm not that bad because I've surrounded myself around people worse than me. I wasn't that bad because I had a job or I was functioning. I wasn't that bad because I can deal with it years later. This is another thing that a lot of people do. They deal with it years later, which is normal, right? It's like, I'll deal with it next year and next year and next year. If it is an illness and if it is a problem, it does not get any better. It just gets worse. It's progressive. And addiction, the word addiction, the definition of addiction is when you physically cannot stop doing something no matter what the consequence is. So let's take away drugs and alcohol. If you physically cannot do something and you ask yourself to stop and you cannot stop, then it is a problem. So take back putting pressure on yourself. shame, take back, all of that stuff. Just ask yourself what you want out of life. Because me asking myself what I wanted out of life 100 times, the only answer I gave was happiness, and I was not happy. So do not care about what anyone else thinks. Do not care about being on anyone else's journey and anyone else's time. But if you are struggling, the best thing to do is deal with it now. But don't put so much pressure on yourself and hate on yourself. Always be kind to yourself about it. Take little steps to get better. You know?
I love that. And I think it's about being brutally honest with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because when I asked that question, what do I want out of life? My answer was, I know what I don't want, and that is this. I did not want this. And it took me so long to get round to I've got to do something about this, to I'm doing something about this, right? So it was a process, right? But you have to start that process off somewhere. And that's by becoming honest with yourself and thinking, is this really what I want to be doing? Am I living the best version of myself? And most people will say no. But most people also won't know what that version is until they do it. So I say it doesn't have to be, in the beginning, it doesn't have to be, right, that's it, I'm done. And you're flailing around the street saying, I'm never drinking again. What it can be is an experiment. It can be a month without alcohol. It can be 3 months, right? Journal. Make notes of how you're feeling emotionally in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. Put personal boundaries in place. Find the right community, you know, like change your habits, change your lifestyle, eat properly, get plenty of sleep, join a gym, all these different things like that improve your life. And at the end of this, what I say, experiment, look back and think, how am I feeling? How is my life better? Do another week, do another month. It's a process, right? Trust the process, Lauren.
I've got that tattooed on my arm.
Well, that's just the weirdest thing.
No, it's literally my mantra.
Well,
it's my mantra.
I was thinking about, I met someone the other night and their niece is a tattooist, right? And where because you know Johnny Lawrence very well, and we've done the mountains, right? He's amazing, isn't he? So we climbed Mount Tubkal last year, and we did the Annapurna circuit together, and we're doing Kilimanjaro next year together.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I've got a tattoo on my shin, right? Is of the mountains and me standing there looking up at these mountains. But I was going to have down the side of my leg, trust the process.
I love that.
So you just told me that. That's just bloody.
Can't even show you it's there. Yeah, no, but you're so right. And like all the advice that you had given here is exactly what I would said as well.
Yeah.
But just to round it up, all of this stuff stems towards self-esteem and self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely.
The more you drink, the more you abuse alcohol, the more you do drugs, the more you do things that you don't want to do. Don't put boundaries in, you people please. You become someone that you're not, which is pretty much my childhood, right? The more my self-esteem goes down. The minute I stand up for my own self-worth and I say, no, I'm not going to do that. I put boundaries in. I start to be healthy, eat well, go out, look amazing, feel amazing. The more my self-esteem goes up, the more I'm going to be like, now I don't even think about drinking because I'm like, why the hell would I ever touch that poison again? Because look at me now. And that's how it happens. It's like, it takes time. Yeah, it does. It's a process.
Yeah.
But once you get to that stage, like of 11, 12 years, or like even like 5 years, I look at my life and I'm like, no, I'm never going to do that, because I look at it and I'm like, that is not making me be the best version of myself. It's making me feel worse.
Yeah. And why would we want to go back to that version? Do you know what I mean? This is the thing, right? I see alcohol exactly for what it is now. And, you know, I get asked the question, what do you feel about alcohol? I say, I absolutely fucking hate alcohol for every single thing it stands for, right? And I will stand up and say that until I die, because it is a vile, evil, toxic drug that strips people, not only their own life, but families around them. You know, the messages I get are heartbreaking, you know, and some of the people I interview as well, where you know, this is an unbelievably devastating drug that is sold on supermarket shelves or wherever you go. Do you know, I just cannot believe it. I just feel like we're an experiment, and we're being looked at by aliens in the mothership. And they're going, these earthlings are imbeciles. They're still drinking. Do you know what I mean? It's just,
it's the number one money maker of the world. That's why cigarettes, and I'm sorry, but that's literally why alcohol is still illegal.
yeah,
Because of how much money they make from
yeah.
it. But it is the most worst drug, because I've studied addiction, and it is by far the worst drug from them all. MDMA and ecstasy is actually probably healthier than alcohol.
Yeah. But we never talk about how much it actually costs the economy as well. You know, the NHS, policing, domestic violence, it costs the economy millions, if not billions of pounds. It's just a ludicrous thing. But it's up to us to see, tap out and go, I don't want to be part of this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and change your life, which you have, I have, and millions of others are doing as well.
And I feel like it is, and this is another thing that I'm just like crazy, is that when I got sober at 18, it was like the most abnormal thing. People would look at me like I'm so weird. And now it is becoming more common. Even in Bali, people don't drink. And it's like, it's really nice to see that people are more awake around it. And knowing that, like, I had a friend the other day that literally was in the gym, and she was like, oh, I got paralytically drunk last night. I can't drink anymore. I hate it. She's like, I hate the way that makes me feel. Yes, she may not have a problem, but she's actually identifying that actually doesn't make her feel good. And that's another thing.
And she's having it to feel good. And then it does the opposite, right? Because it makes me feel good because it helps me to forget, or it cheers me up after a bad day. But that lasts about an hour, right? And then I often say, if there was a meal, right, say paella, and you had that meal and it gave you food poisoning, you probably never touch it again. But with alcohol, because it's addictive, we keep going back and back and back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, like your work, I'm so passionate about educating people in a non-judgmental way, not preaching and going, you know, I like to help people understand it, what it actually means to awful.
Well, I know. I like to talk about the blind spot. You know, in the big book, they talk about the blind spot, where in the brain, you wake up the next day and you forget how bad it was. And that's something in the brain that happens. And you go back to the feeling of how it made you feel when it was good.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I'm going to get that point again where you're never going to go back to that place. It was the same with me and food. It was like, oh my God, you know, because for a period it worked until it stopped working.
Yeah. Well, that's fading bias effect, and that happens with everything. Bad relationships, you know, people in narcissistic relationships, right? They stay in it because almost like chaos creates chaos, and it's what they're used to, right? And when they come out for a few weeks or days or whatever, it's oh, thank God I'm away from that. And then people naturally start to miss the chaos, right? Because you get cortisol and adrenaline from chaos, right?
Yeah.
And that's an addictive thing running through your veins, right? And it, you know, that's where the courage comes in, and say, no, I need to stay here rather than go backwards to that chaos, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I quite often say to my people that come to me for help, it's like, this is the hardest bit, is changing that habitual behavior.
The narrative,
you know, and the stories we tell ourselves, which you said with the NLP, neuro-linguistic programming.
Just say NLP.
I've never said neuro-linguistic programming. That's why I couldn't relate to it.
I love that.
But anyway, it's like, that is such the purest gift of sobriety, is that you get to know yourself. And that's such an experience, isn't it? It's like, I'll tell you one thing, Lauren, one thing that really, really surprised me about myself is that I'm actually really quiet.
Oh my God. I honestly, like, okay, I'm not quiet, but I've realized over the years I'm actually a bit more introverted than I thought I was.
Yeah, I was all that mouth and trousers, but booming in the pub, that kind of bloke. But that was for attention, right? Because I built that character up. But Anyway, Lauren, I'm sure we could ramble on forever, and I know you've got
Oh.
jet lag, so I'm really grateful you joined me. How can people find you?
So you can follow me on Instagram. It's at not no no wait. It's at I am Lauren White. It's not at. Oh God, I am Lauren White. My website is www.laurenwhitespeaker.com. But generally Instagram is my biggest platform. I cannot add another platform in. I'm
No,
just
I
done.
get you. I get
Yeah.
you. Boundaries. We have to talk about boundaries. But look, I'll put all your details on the show notes anyway. I'm so grateful you've taken time to join me today, Lauren.
Honestly, like you help me share my story. Like it helps me. I get something out of this. You know, I'll leave today and be like, you know what, I'm helping someone today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And
even though
me, I feel inspired. I've had a bit of a funny old day today. I felt a little bit flat today, and I don't know why. But I feel like raring to go now. So thank you so much as well. And let's see each other soon.
Yes, please.
All right, Lauren, look after yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.